I'm Mary Richmond. I'm a professional social worker, and I've worked coordinatively with Lundy Bancroft with the Protective Mothers Alliance for Justice. I'll later touch on my story about how I've experienced domestic violence in the court system here in the United States. I myself got introduced to this movement through a friend, David Kaczynski, who's also an activist. He had introduced me to Mo, and he was an integral part of our trial specifically. I had reported to a hotline that my children were being abused, and if a woman needed a place to go, where would they call? And when I stated what was occurring at home, I was told that I needed to either go to a shelter or risk losing my children for failure to protect, which started what felt like a treadmill on high speed with no shutoff. Mind you, at the time, my paradigm was that domestic violence happens to poor, uneducated women of minority. And even after coming out of the shelter, I still didn't necessarily see myself as a victim because he didn't brutally beat me. But every aspect of my life was controlled. Primarily, it was emotional abuse, and as I started to get well and question his authority, things started to get more chaotic. As I noticed that he was harming the children and would question it in any way, more things would happen to them, which would force me to stay home and force me further into isolation. When we got into the system itself, I had no resources. Prior to all of this, I was relatively independent. I traveled through Europe on my own. I was a semi-professional athlete. I did triathlons. There was much that I had accomplished, so putting myself into the paradigm of victim wasn't a natural step for me. And he ran marathons for charity. He's very charismatic and friendly. Most people that know him think he's a really nice guy, and those were the things that attracted me to him. But there was this itching feeling that something wasn't quite right. And it's hard to say, you know, this person is totally different at home than he is in a public setting. When I got into the system, I had an advocate state to me, I need you to take a look at this power and control wheel and highlight those things that have affected your life, because I still wasn't convinced that I was a victim of domestic violence. And by the time I was done, the entire chart was yellow, except for two things. We didn't own a pet, so we didn't harm that. And he never threatened to commit suicide. Well, it's a total undermining of who you are. I would stay up till 4 in the morning to make sure that everything was in its proper place, and he would find the one thing that I left out, whether it was a teacup in the sink or otherwise, and that would be his so-called reason for pitching a fit and destroying my things. And at the time, there was a tremendous amount of chaos in my life. We had just bought a house that was a notorious house. David Kaczynski, as most of you know, is the brother of Ted Kaczynski. And so when we purchased the house, we had a media circus on our front porch, and I was 7.5 months pregnant. I had contracted an STD, and he was my only partner, so you don't get those miraculously. And yet I didn't know where to go with that, and where do you go with 2 children, pregnant, no money, and a family that's absolutely disconnected? And the isolation was magnified with the notoriety of what was going on with the home. I went to my physician and I said, I'm really depressed. I'm looking around my basement for a way to kill myself without leaving a mess. Can you help me? And he did, and he heard me, and he trusted that what I was saying was truthful, and that allowed me the opportunity to kind of look at it from a different perspective. And as I started to get well, things got more out of control. When we got into the court system, it automatically started to feel like something wasn't quite right. I was appointed a court-appointed attorney with 17 file folders on his arm, and when we walked into the court, he didn't know the name of myself or our children, and my ex-husband's attorney was the highest paid attorney in the area. And it sounded like I had been doing all the abuse. So I ended up borrowing money from a high school friend to hire an attorney, which, looking back on it in retrospect, I think he was primary in setting us into this system of what they call high conflict divorce, which means money-making scheme for attorneys in code. And I was given a psychological evaluation, which prior to this I've never had a mental illness, and then discredited. Nothing that I said mattered because I had this diagnosis of a personality disorder. I think my disorder is I tell the truth, and most people don't want to know. And so when it's set up in a caveat of his word against yours, he's going to win because he's paying for that. And it took a while for me to really understand that. But he aligned himself with people that I would have never expected would discredit me. Now, mind you, as we're going through this, there were 12 things going on at once. He allowed the house to go into foreclosure. He took all of our personal belongings from the home, wiped out accounts, leaving me with about $3.28. I had never left our children with anyone, so I had no idea of where you would go to set up childcare, nor did I want to, because I wanted to offer them as much support as I could. It ended up where I was able to find a place to rent. I found and tried to keep some stability in their lives as all this was going on, but there were still cases where the kids would come home injured or the pediatrician would hotline him, and it again was portrayed in court as me being vindictive, that I was making these false accusations. As I said, as far as the items in which we owned, it turned out where the only property we had left was a vehicle. He had totaled the car and asked me to sign on the title so that we could split the insurance money. And when he came the following time, my son didn't want to go to the visitation. My daughter was crying. And as I came out to the car to comfort Julia, who was then 3.5, I leaned in the rear passenger side in order to give her a hug, to tell her I would see her in 2 sons or 2 moons and a son and 3 sons. He hit the automatic window, trapping my head between the glass and the frame, and tried pulling forward. My reaction is that of which someone would have in a in a moment of panic, and the kids were screaming and crying, and the entire time him saying to me, "Look what you're doing to the children! Stop! Stop! Look what you're doing!" And I was able to get one child out of the car, and because he wasn't there, they weren't able to serve him with a warrant. And when it finally was tried in a civil court, mind you, he had never been arrested before, so he had no previous record, and not to say that he had not done things that were illegal and or a crime. I wanted to make sure that I protected him, in a sense, for their sake. And every strategy any woman makes in these circumstances, it's the best decision at that time, not the best decision of all time. So we went through a trial where I was portrayed as somebody who had him frivolously arrested and made false accusations, and I have a mental illness. And because I had at one point brought forward that he had threatened me with a gun, I had tainted the jurors, and that particular criminal proceeding was dropped, a court pending dismissal, so he has no record of that. Since that time, mind you, we'd been in the court for 6.5 years, not being out of any one single court for more than 2 consecutive months. I am a social worker. I went through graduate school while I was also going through this and trying to offer as much emotional support to both Maximilian and Julia. When I finished graduate school and took a full-time job as a geriatric social worker, I made $31,000 a year. Within 6 months of that, he ended up gaining sole custody. I pay him 48% of my income. It's 25% standard plus what's understood as add-ons. right after our Supreme Court divorce proceedings, he had moved in with a girlfriend in the highest income bracket area in this part of New York State, where they don't rent houses and or apartments, and I wouldn't be able to afford if they had. It started another trial where he claimed that the children would be better off going to a school in his area than where I was previously living. It took 2.5 years to go through that trial. One judge wasn't reelected, so a new judge came onto it. And in the middle of that trial, my daughter had disclosed to me that when she takes a shower with her dad, the water drips off his penis and it looks like he's peeing. I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. I, of course, believed her. I later asked her, does your dad not realize how independent you are? And she says, well, it's okay. Actually, I don't really like it. I'd rather shower with his girlfriend, Maria. And what I learned from that was they had both been showering with their dad and his girlfriend. And because, as the CPS, Child Protective Services, reported, because there was no physical touch, it didn't constitute abuse. So again, I think this was about the 15th child abuse report, and the pediatrician had hotlined that. It was dismissed as if it did not occur. Soon after that was when I lost custody. What typically happens in these cases is if a woman comes forward with any allegations of sexual misconduct, she's discredited. She's seen as having an axe to grind. And I don't know if there's any one right way to handle that, because I question it over and over again. But in the meantime, during this whole process, I had gone through 3 psychological reports with the same practitioner, which is unethical in the field, with the same tool, the MMPI. I could go on for hours explaining all of the reasons why it's unethical to practice in that way, but irregardless, the outcome is all the same. After the 3rd evaluation, our children had been evaluated at that time as well. When our son Maximilian was asked if there was one thing you could change about your parents, what would it be? He asked that I would cook better food. I was a vegetarian at the time. And he asked that his dad stop hitting him on the back, neck, and shoulders. That forensic examiner, who's notorious in this area for being a father's rights advocate, stated that he believed that the children would be in better care in their father's possession. And the decision was made. The trial had ended in October. The judge had stated that he would issue his finding within 60 days. The decision was made, like I said, October. The decision was made in June of the following year, after another school year had completed. And because they'd been in that particular school where I was driving them an hour to get to school and an hour to pick them up, they didn't want to change the consistency of where they'd been attending school. Since that time, like I said, I pay 48% of my income. When you look at the net of what that means, half of $31,000, and then I'm required to have them every other weekend and Wednesday evenings for 2.5 hours. And during every school holiday, I get 2 weeks vacation a year. During those vacation times, I work without pay. As far as how they're doing, that's hard to say. Most of the time, I think they do okay. They're older than they need to be at this stage of their lives. Since that time, and throughout this, what I've found to be most important is to question authority. I'd gone to support groups where I would hear from social service providers that it's a broken system, and what I wanted to know is, where do I sign up to get my toolbox? And I have connected with women in my area who've also been through the same forensic examiners and the same judges, and found that they are having a similar experience. We've raised awareness and done court watch. We've also protested at the Court of Appeals. I've assisted Mo for the last 3 years in organizing this. conference particularly, and I've worked nationally with Lundy Bancroft, offering support and options to women that are going through it when they call and ask if there's somebody that can advocate for them and or be an expert witness. Offer them ideas about what they've done and what they might want to do, and we've strategized about what's understood as the Protective Mothers Alliance for Justice, which empowers them to find new ways to address this system or the system that they're working in. There's not currently a website, and what we've been doing in one way is funneling it through Lundy so that we can weed out anybody who might want the information that isn't necessarily going to use it in the way that we've intended to use it. It's primarily to help folks strategize with other people in their area to find support. Women thrive in connection, and there is not one survivor I've met yet that doesn't have the most amazing coping mechanism. So there's no trained social service provider out there that's going to offer them anything they don't already have. And offering support and validation in a system that typically is going to tell you that you're just another woman who's made bad choices. So.